Hey there, and welcome to the Bringing Business to Retail podcast. Now, Google Ads is one of those platforms that it feels like it's really difficult to get your head around. If you're not in there all the time, then you're kind of just messing around and hoping for the best. And it's not uncommon for the retailers that I work with to reach out and say, hey, my ads haven't been approved, or my ad account got shut down and I didn't do anything wrong. So today on the podcast, John Horn is going to go through with us step by step and work out where those problems could be, how to make sure that our ad account is set up correctly, and making sure that we're compliant so that we don't have these problems in the future. Welcome, John.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problems. Google Ads. I feel like every ads platform is one of those mythical unicorns where you're just at the mercy of shoving. It's like a poker machine sometimes. You're kind of shoving money in and crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. And I think that all just comes down to the fact that you need to be in these platforms a lot to be making sure that you actually understand what's going on. You're not stepping on any toes of those Google gods, and that you do actually get that return. So tell us a little bit about what you do, how you got into Google Ads, and then we can jump in with all of these juicy tidbits tips and tricks that you've been sharing with me.
Yeah, so I got into Google Ads a little over a decade ago at this point, and really that was the foundation of StubGroup, which is a company that I'm now the CEO of. And back in the day, the two guys, one of them's my brother, another a long time friend, and so they started StubGroup again a little over a decade ago, really around Google Ads, saying, hey, there's this digital advertising space of which at that point Google was the top channel, and it still is a very important channel. And they said, hey, there's lots of businesses who just need help figuring out the black box, like we like to talk about it sometimes. And so started StubGroup at that point. I came on as employee number one, and really we've just, ever since then been helping businesses figure out how to run Google Ads and other digital advertising platforms, and figure out ultimately how to make money online.
So I guess let's jump in with what are the biggest reasons that you see people's ads accounts get shut down? We'll come back to compliance and all the things to do to set up, but let's just go straight into the meaty stuff and talk about, I'm sure you see this on, people come to you all the time saying, I don't know what I did. So let's start there. What did you do wrong if your Google Ads account got shut down?
Let's dig in because there's a lot to cover here. So first, kind of the basics of why does Google shut down accounts? And for context too, can kind of talk some numbers. They haven't released yet. I don't think the numbers for last year. They should come out soon. But the numbers they released for 2023 were they shut down, I believe it was 12 million. They suspended 12 million ad accounts. And I think it was over 5 billion ads disapproved, somewhere in that range. So this is not a, thing that happens just every now and then. It is something that happens very, very often. And there are a lot of reasons why, but at the core of it, Google has policies in place because they want to protect the people who are using Google. They want to make sure that when you click an ad on Google, you're not going to a website that has malware that's going to get downloaded onto your computer. Or if you are, an e-commerce website, you're selling products, they don't want you to get scammed and have a bad experience going through a Google ad. And then, of course, worst case scenario for them, Google gets sued because someone had a bad experience through a Google ad. And so they're very, very paranoid about protecting the ecosystem, as we call it.
Not perfect, is it?
However,
Because
yeah,
I saw an ad just recently for a very big known brand, and it said something like 90% off, and it was a top featured Google ad. And we all know, brands like, there's no 90% off Nike. And straight away, you could see just a little typo in the email address, in the website URL. But I was sitting here thinking, if you are not a savvy marketer, and you're, right, especially right now when the economy is tight, you're looking for all these bargains. It's really easy to click on these things. So how are they getting through Google? If 12 million accounts were shut down, how are they top over Nike?
it is a fantastic question. It's a full scale war between Google and between the scammers, the bad actors out there who are trying to leverage Google for their own nefarious purposes. And it's very much kind of a whack-a-mole where Google is constantly whacking those moles. And, they'll find a way that bad actors are leveraging the platform, kind of getting around their policies, and they'll shut that down. And then the bad actors will find a different way and they'll shut that down. And all of that, I'm very, very grateful that they are doing that because I don't want bad actors out there. I want it, to be safe when I'm browsing Google. Unfortunately, for all the legitimate advertisers out there, there are a lot of people that are kind of collateral damage that get caught in the crossfire because, Google is operating at massive, massive scale. Many of the decisions that are being made, it's not a human looking at things and saying, take that down. It's automation, it's algorithms doing things. And so constantly, truly legitimate advertisers who aren't trying to do anything wrong, they're not trying to violate Google's policies, will have their accounts shut down. And there's a variety of reasons. Sometimes it is because they violated a policy. Usually what's happened is, again, they haven't done something malicious. It's just they didn't know there was a policy.
They
It
didn't
could be
read
something
those
as
300 pages of terms and conditions that you
exactly.
just scroll on by.
100%. It's like I didn't know I couldn't have a redirect in my URL, or I didn't know that I
I
had to
didn't
have
know
these
that.
policy pages. Yeah, and there's so many things like that people aren't going to go read, like you said, all 300 pages of policy. And so there's things like that just they're not trying to do anything wrong. It just they did truly violate the policy. And when that happens, when Google suspends them, the real challenge is that Google does not have a good process in place for helping them unsuspend and get back online. They do have a process. They have an appeals process you can go through, but it's very, very vague. Google's very vague with telling you what you did wrong. It's not, hey, you have a redirect in your ad. That's a problem. Fix it. It's, hey, you violated the circumventing systems policy. Here's kind of our very broad policy, which says don't do bad things with a couple examples of what a bad thing might be. But, you know,
That might but
it's
not be
not
the bad thing
comprehensive.
that you got pinged for.
And we won't tell you what you did exactly. And so what a lot of businesses will do is then they'll submit an appeal to Google, very understandably, and they'll be like, "Hey, please tell us what we did wrong, and we'll fix it." And what they've just done is they've wasted an appeal attempt, and we'll get nowhere because Google will not have a constructive dialogue. They will simply say, "You violate our policies, and if you believe it's an error, you can submit an appeal." And
Because the
no
first
further.
appeal goes to AI or some kind of algorithm, or does a person really look at that first appeal? Do you know?
It's a good question. Most often, the first appeal is going to go through an algorithm. There may be some situations where a human will have some input, but honestly, even if a human has input, it really doesn't matter because they're still not going to tell you anything different. Google's not in the business of helping you fix the mistake they say you've made. And so that's where companies like StubGroup will come in, which is where we basically have to advocate for you and say, okay, Google's not going to tell you what went wrong. We have a really good sense of what may have gone wrong simply because we've been doing this for a decade and we've seen so many different things. We've just learned over time what Google does like, what they don't like. We know the policies, etc. And so what you have to do as an advertiser is you have to basically make everything perfect and then submit to Google. And hopefully you fixed what the problem was. Hopefully you fixed any other problems that maybe didn't trigger the initial suspension, but that might be there when Google analyzes things. And, hopefully they smile upon you. But also,
I was going to
yeah,
say
go
that's
ahead.
like the first reason, right? You intentionally or unintentionally did something wrong,
Yes.
but I'm sure there's
So
more.
there's absolutely more. So yeah, intentionally or unintentionally did something wrong. And in the intentional space, I'll just caveat too, like we're not working with the people who intentionally are doing things wrong. We focus on the people who truly want to abide by Google's policies, and that's who we help.
I would have figured if
Um,
you're on the podcast that we've vetted that part.
Very important. Yes. If you're a bad actor out there trying to do things, please don't call my team. We're not going to help you, and we're not interested. There's also this kind of very, very fuzzy space where Google thinks you did something wrong, but you didn't really necessarily do anything wrong. Google just thinks you're suspicious for whatever reason. So there's a bunch of things that come up. Sometimes there's a thing called they call suspicious payment activity, where your account gets suspended and they have this flag like, hey, you got suspicious payment activity. And the advertiser is like, what does that mean? Why? Sometimes this will happen before you've literally spent any money with Google. Like you create an account, get going. There's been no charges to your card, and yet somehow you've got suspicious payment activity. And there's a lot of different things that can cause this. Sometimes it's a situation where like maybe an advertiser forgot they had an ad account from the past that had the same payment information, the same billing address, and they create this new account. And even though that doesn't violate any policies, you're allowed to do that. That what that does do is it looks similar to what a lot of those bad actors do, who are constantly spinning up new accounts. And so Google may flag you for that, and now you're guilty until proven innocent. So that type of thing will happen. Another good example would be this policy they call unacceptable business practices, which is where basically they're saying, hey, we think you're sketchy as a business. And there could be lots of reasons. One thing I've seen happen often is in the franchise space. So let's say you're a franchisee and you've got, your logo of the franchise you work with. Your domain name might even include part of that business name, things like that, which you're completely authorized to do. You're a franchisee, you've got your license number, etc. But Google, when they look at it, they see, oh, we think this site is pretending to be this other more established site because they've got the same logo and a similar domain. And, this might be phishing or just, trademark abuse or whatever. And so they suspend you. And again, guilty until proven innocent. So that's kind of that second category because we didn't really do something wrong, but we still have to prove to Google that we're not doing anything wrong. And often we have to, make changes to our website or maybe our ads to make hyper clear to Google and to just regular consumers who we are, how legitimate we are, things like that.
So intentionally or unintentionally did something wrong. You look a little bit sketchy, even though you might not be. Is there anything else? Are there certain niches that you can't advertise on Google?
There are prohibited niches and then there are restricted niches. So there are, prohibitions on some things like firearms, for example. You can't advertise guns on Google, things like that. And then there are
Can I just jump in?
sensitive categories.
I'm not
What's
a
that?
gun person. I know this much about guns, which is zero, other than what I've ever seen on TV. Can you Google shopping a gun? Is that a
You
thing?
cannot.
Okay.
No, you can't.
feel like
And they
that's-
even have restrictions on
We won't go there.
a lot of projectile things. So like airsoft guns, for example, things like that. Like they're very tight in some of those things. So there's things like that, explosives. There are things like, hey, if you have a service where you are, doing something deceptive, let's say you are writing essays for people, and then those people are going to submit essays, as their own work, things like that. You're not allowed to advertise, deceptive practices, things like that.
I feel slightly better at knowing these things. I've never Googled them, so I don't know.
I have spent way too much time in Google's policies to understand how many different weird verticals there are and out there. It's an interesting world.
So
Um,
those niches that quite often get, I guess, targeted in different platforms, like adult toys, like the CBD products, like I'm trying to think of they're the two that pop to mind. Can you advertise those on Google?
Some. So they usually have specific policies for a lot of those things. So for example, there are some adult toys that can be advertised. There's kind of restrictions on, what's in the content of the ads, and there's restrictions on those ads would only display to people who don't have like safe browsing turned on, things like that in their browsers. So there are some things like that. Alcohol is an example. You are allowed to advertise alcohol in certain ways with certain restrictions and things. And then there's another probably even bigger category of verticals where Google's very sensitive about them, but it's hard to know what they do or don't like. So for example, supplements. So health related supplements, you are allowed to advertise supplements, but Google is very paranoid about it. And it's very common to see websites in that space have their accounts shut down, again, without really clear guidance as to why. Sometimes it might be, hey, there are specific products that Google does not allow to be advertised. They have like a non-comprehensive list of things. They say you can't do it, but it's also non-comprehensive. And so it's like, well, what about the ones that aren't on the list? Like, am I advertising those? It's kind of fun trying to, not fun, fun in a sarcastic way, trying to figure those things out. And so like supplements, anything weight loss related, things in the financial space, Google's, more paranoid about the financial space. There's extra disclaimers you need to have if you're providing loan products or things like that. And yeah, so anybody operating those spaces is more likely to have ad disapprovals or maybe suspensions just because Google is hypersensitive about it.
Got it. All right. So now we have some ideas of why we might have been shut down. Is there anything that we can do before we even start running the ads? Or maybe if you're already running ads and you're listening to this going, I don't want that to be me. Is there anything we can do to make sure that maybe our website's more robust or our policies are more robust?
Yeah, I'm gonna give some very practical tips. On the ad account side of things, be really careful about how you enter your business and billing information. Make sure it's accurate. Make sure it's consistent. So for example, let's say you have You've registered the ad account in your business name. Don't use your personal credit card to pay for the ad spend. Use a credit card with the business name on it, because otherwise it's not a for sure thing that Google would suspend you, but it's a stronger chance because that may look suspicious because those things don't match up.
I mean, something as
Um,
simple as the address, I can put my hand up and say, I'm guilty of that. Because sometimes I think, do I use the office address or did I use the post office box? Like, no, they're kind of interchangeable. We go to both.
Exactly. Yeah. And, logically for us, just go trying to do the right thing. We don't even think twice about it. But then Google, especially because the algorithms in place, the automation, they say, oh, this doesn't match that. And now you've got a problem. And it's when that problem takes place, it is so much harder to solve than you think it should be. So you want to be proactive like we're talking about right now. So
We'll
that's
get
really
to that,
important.
get to that part later.
Yeah, absolutely. On the website side of things, some tactical things you can do there. You mentioned policy pages, and that's a perfect place to go. So Google wants to see a couple of different things. They want to see a privacy policy on your website. How do you handle privacy of the people who are on your website? If you're in the e-commerce space, they want to see things like your refund policy, your return policy, your shipping policy, so that it's really clear how long it's going to take for people to get products, are items refundable or not, all that type of stuff. That stuff is very important. It's good too to have, disclaimers, terms and conditions, especially like if you're in, again, any sensitive space like finance, like supplements, etc. Just think through, what disclaimers should I have. A really tactical tip, like if you're in weight loss, if you have any type of product with before and after pictures, you need to have disclaimers right there saying, individual results may vary, things like that. Try to think a little bit like a lawyer when you're looking at your website. How could things go wrong? Because that's how Google looks at it.
It's funny you should say that because I've noticed that, especially on Pinterest, where there's lots of, I seem to get constantly bombarded with exercise apps. I don't know why. Not something I even Google. I go to the gym, I go for a swim. It's not something I'm Googling. Anyway, somehow I clearly am the person that needs that. And I just noticed recently that now all of these demo videos now say actor portraying or, the actor used. And I'm just like, yeah, I quite like the fact that you got to be a little bit more transparent these days.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of the things that Google's pushing for are good, and they have good intentions at heart of, protecting consumers and fighting against the urge of marketers to cut corners and play loose with the truth. And so there's a lot of good behind the intentions.
Okay, those are the bad actors. Alrighty. So if we can just quickly recap, here's what I've got so far. There are reasons that you could be getting blackballed, such as we unintentionally did something wrong. We maybe don't have our terms and policies. Sometimes it's just because we're very similar, like maybe you're a franchisee. It might be that you've got a product that falls into this very vague list. What about things like trademark? You and I were just talking about that before. And it was clear to me when I was looking at this fake Nike website that clearly that wasn't them. But if you have a trademark, do you need to upload that somewhere to make sure that you own it?
Trademarks are definitely a very sensitive area for sure. So I'll cover two sections of that. If you're a trademark owner and you want to protect your trademark, it used to be that you could go proactively to Google and prove that you're the trademark owner, send them documentation, and then if anybody else wanted to use your trademark in ads, they would have to get your explicit approval for their account, like if you had a reseller or something like that. Google changed that policy to where it's now a little bit more of ask forgiveness rather than permission, to where you have to see if someone is you have to find an example of someone misusing your trademark and report that to Google, and then say, I own the trademark, here's the proof, and then Google will take that down. So it's reactive now as opposed to proactive. But if you're on the reseller side of things, if you're a legitimate, let's say, reseller of Nike, for example, Google is very, very sensitive about that because of exactly the type of ad that you mentioned, where people are trying to scam people. And so you want to make super clear on your website what your affiliation is with any brands that you are selling. If you're an authorized reseller, say it. If you're not an authorized reseller, but obviously not doing anything wrong, be really clear, hey, we're not affiliated with this company, things like that. And have those disclaimers, have the information, use logos appropriately. Don't write ads or product titles in a way that makes it sound like you are Nike, you are a reseller of Nike. And that will help. you may still have issues, and usually what we see pop up here is Google's policy about counterfeit goods is what they'll flag you for. And then often we have to kind of fight the fight with them to say, nope, we're not counterfeit. Sometimes we have to send them like very detailed PDFs of, hey, here's how we authenticate things. So for example, we've worked with like luxury handbag platform where they, purchase legitimate handbags, they have an authentication process, so forth and so on. And we had to put that whole process together and send that to Google, explaining in detail how they confirmed that things were legit and that they were operating legitimately as a company.
Imagine that if you sell any licensed products like, Disney or NBL or football or all those kinds of things, that could be an area that, unless you have those words, something like licensed reseller or authorized reseller, that could be something that quite easily gets flagged. And again, you think you've done nothing wrong. You paid the company, you got the goods.
Totally. And it's even more tricky because Google has this policy called the reseller policy where you are allowed to resell, someone's products and to use their trademark in that context. eBay is allowed to have Nike shoes in a product listing and advertise that on Google. But even though you're allowed to, Google still sometimes cracks down on it. And that's where they're so inconsistent. And that's where you're kind of proving like your policy says I can, I am, why am I flagged? Or how do we get past this? And
Got it.
Yeah,
okay.
Fun times.
Just say all of this happens. You mentioned right back at the beginning, if we can just circle back to, if you just say, what did I do? You wasted one appeal attempt. So give us the lowdown. What did this appeal attempt look like? What do we need to supply in each one? Do we just not bother?
You definitely, unfortunately, have to bother if you want to get back online, because otherwise you are in jail forever from Google's perspective. What it looks like.
Sorry, just to jump in.
Yeah.
It's so easy to forget. You mentioned something right also back at the beginning where you said they maybe set up an account ages ago. And you said that. And I was like, yeah, I think I did. And it's usually because when you set up your Google account, it's like, it says, do this with a free trial and do this with a free trial. And you're like, okay. And you click all the buttons and you're really excited. And that could have been 15 years ago.
Yeah. And we see that type of thing happen all the time where we got to go digging around with the client, because also Google won't tell you what you've got. Like you got to figure it out on your own. And so many times we feel like there's something missing.
I was going to say, we just went into Workspace today and trying to work out which email was associated. I watched a lot of YouTube videos today to work out which email was associated with it.
Yes, I feel that pain. I've felt that pain too many times. Yeah. So kind of going back to the question about what does that appeal process look like? It's a written appeal that you submit to Google. And basically it's a form that you fill out. And they ask you some different information about your account. And then they ask you to kind of describe why you think you should be allowed to come back online. And you're allowed to submit documentation as well. And so the way that we approach with our clients is, first of all, we try and make sure everything is as perfect as possible. We look at all different types of things that may have gone wrong in the account and the website, et cetera. And we often won't know which specifically one of those things may have caused a problem. So we want to fix everything, have it perfect, and then provide a very detailed explanation to Google of all the changes we've made, of why we believe we're legitimate, of apologizing if we made a mistake, things like that. And then we also want to provide documentation to Google about the legitimacy of the business, so that Google sees we're not a shady fly-by-night company. Here's who we are, articles of incorporation, things like that. And so we submit all of that to Google, basically make the case, and then Google reviews that. And sometimes they, give the thumbs up and you get a boilerplate email saying, hey, you're good to go. And then sometimes they don't. And this is where then the fight continues. So we don't just take no for an answer the first time, because there's also kind of an art, both an art and a science to this. The art is sometimes you're like, this thing over here may look weird to Google. We're not sure. Let's try and appeal and not address this, because it's going to be a really big amount of work for the client to change. And then maybe, okay, appeal number 2, we're going to invest the work into doing this thing differently. And then we're going to submit an appeal again. And, sometimes our first appeal gets accepted. Sometimes it's appeal 4, 5, 6. Like it can be a long process of just working back and forth with Google, tweaking different things. And sometimes Google's just so inconsistent that like they'll deny an appeal. We'll wait a week, submit the same appeal, and they'll accept it.
That's the question I was going to ask. So when you get denied, say you get denied on the first one, you think we've listened to this podcast, we've gone back, we've fixed our policies, we've made sure that we've done all the things that we think, there was a redirect, blah, blah, blah. We submit our appeal and it comes back. Does it come back with a reason?
Nope, no reason, just a
Not even a
boilerplate.
vague reason?
I mean, they'll mention again the policy that they said
Okay.
that you violated, and they're like, yeah, go click on the link to read the policy again, basically.
Okay. All right. So do we attempt to fix something between appeal 1 and 2? Or do we, if we, obviously, the simple answer is reach out to someone like you who knows what they're doing. But if someone's listening and maybe they've done an appeal once and they're thinking, well, I just gave up, Google Ads is not for me, I just will go and put my money into Meta. Do we have to do more changes? Or you just said there, maybe on appeal 6 and 7, you just submit the same thing. So is it worth just submitting the same thing?
It's a great question. I would always say anytime you get a denial of an appeal, kind of go back to the drawing board, try to look at things with a fresh pair of eyes and see, is there anything I've missed or anything more I can do to prove my legitimacy to Google? There are times, like we just said, where the same appeal gets denied once, gets accepted another time. I would say that's not super common. It happens enough to mention it, but usually when we are submitting new appeals, we are doing something different each time. We are, maybe changing how we are wording the appeal, or we are making more changes to the website, or we are providing even more documentation. Because part of what we also want to do is we want to show Google in the appeal process that we are putting in a lot of effort to comply with their policy.
That you're
And so there
trying.
is a danger, especially if we're early on, if we just resubmit the same appeal again, Google's like, well, these guys don't care. We told them it was wrong. So it's more likely in that scenario that they're going to, deny it out of hand again.
Okay. And so do we get people at any point looking at our appeals, like real live people?
Sometimes. You won't know. It's a black box in the back end. You can't talk to people who are, hopefully looking at the appeals. But generally, if you get past the first couple of appeals and sometimes potentially in the first appeals as well, you may get in front of a person. What that means, though, is not that the person is spending a lot of time looking at your case. That person has, a pile a mile wide of things they're working through. And so they're doing a quick glance. And, if there's a compelling reason, hopefully, that you've made, then they might, click the button to say they're good. But this is, again, why you have to be really careful with how you word appeals, because when you get in front of a person, it's a person. And if you're screaming at them and saying, Google, you are destroying my business, they're not more likely to say yes. If you're saying, hey, we want to genuinely do what's right. Sorry for anything we did wrong. Here's all we're doing to try to do things right. That's going to increase your chances. So, yeah,
But play nice, whether it's AI or a real person.
100%.
Okay. So I think you've given us a lot to listen to. I think this is one of those episodes that people should bookmark, because even if it hasn't happened now, you never know if it's going to happen again. And it'll be sitting in the back of people's brains going, I listened to that podcast. What was the name? I just got to go and find it. And they'll type in, my Google's been banned or something, and my Google Ads account has been shut down, and you're going to come up. So you've given us all of the reasons. Well, you've given us a lot of reasons. Obviously, the list is exhaustive, but you've given us a lot of reasons of why our account might get shut down, the things we need to do to be compliant. And then I think you gave us a really comprehensive guide of how to put an appeal in. And what I'm taking away from that is it's not a one-liner, which so many people just think, but I didn't do anything wrong. Can you please tell me what I did wrong? It is literally, this is what I would be doing is I have audited, you mentioned these, this is what I've looked at the policies, I've audited our account, I could see we had this, we've adjusted that, and really stepping through all of the things that you've done. So like you said, if even if AI is reading it, it's looking at it going, well, they did something.
Yes. Think about it like you're going to court. You are making your case to a judge, and you want to have all of your ducks in a row when you do that.
And it's such a scary thought, isn't it? Because you're sitting here in the background going, I want to give you money. Like, why are
Yes.
you making this so hard? Give me my credit card.
I know Google. I mean, I've had this conversation with many Google reps over time. It's like, guys, they want to give you so much money, and we've had accounts that have spent, 5 million, $6 million over time. It's not like they're just shutting down, cheapo accounts. They shut down all sorts of accounts, and we're like, you know, we just want to pay you money.
Yeah.
Help us help you.
Yeah. John, thank you so much for walking us through all of this. If people are looking at ways that they can get their account optimized, or if they need help with this, you're an official Google partner, how can they reach out to you?
Best place is our website, StubGroup.com. See all the info in there, and our team would love to chat.
And we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. Even I have learned something. Even I. That makes me sound like I know all the things. I don't know all the things, especially about Google Ads, but I have learned a lot already from this episode. So thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.